My sex with a burglar during a robbery. Does it ever feel like your whole life turns into complete chaos? Like nothing is going right, and everyone around you just adds more weight to it. Maybe this sounds familiar, because that's exactly what happened to me. But what occurred on the night of April 10, 2023, exceeded all of my worst expectations, and yet gave me a feeling I could never have imagined. I came home around 9:30 p.m. after another exhausting day at work. The past few months had been one endless trial. I lost both my parents in an accident in January, and my boyfriend left me 2 weeks after, claiming he couldn't handle my grief. I was 27 years old, and I had no one left but my friend Amy, but she lived several states away and couldn't be with me all the time. This apartment on the 5th floor in Edgewater, New Jersey, had become my prison. Every night when I came home, I felt the emptiness. I'd walk through the dark hallway, take off my coat, and sit in front of the TV, mindlessly switching channels. But that night, everything changed. I hadn't even taken off my shoes when I heard a faint noise from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was my cat knocking something off the table, but a few seconds later, I saw him, a man in a dark jacket with a hood, rummaging through my cabinet. My heart froze. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. All I could think in that moment was, not now. Please, not this. The man turned around, saw me, and for a second, he froze too. We stared at each other like two pieces of the same puzzle that didn't fit together. I didn't see rage or aggression in his eyes. He looked as confused as I was. And that was the scariest part. I didn't know what to expect. Instead of attacking or fleeing, he just stood there, as if waiting for something. I felt the adrenaline rising inside me, but along with it came another feeling, curiosity. It was a strange moment when fear and intrigue blended into one. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear every beat. Rather than fully succumbing to fear, I decided to speak to him. "Who are you? And what are you doing in my home?" The words came out calmer than I expected. He was silent for a few seconds, then lowered his hands and said, "I wasn't trying to scare you. This is stupid. I just needed some money." There was no aggression in his voice. He looked tired, more than that, empty. And in that moment, I realized that we were alike in some way. We were both on the edge. Reddit user lost_soul_84, Sarah, that's terrifying, but also incredibly fascinating how you reacted. I could never have talked to a burglar. I hope everything was safer from then on. Desire 23. Oh my god, I felt the same thing while reading your story. Fear and curiosity, that mix of emotions sometimes scares me too. Stay strong, you're brave. Dark Knight 90, you definitely have a strong character. I would have panicked and locked myself in the bathroom. But your response to his emptiness impressed me. Looking forward to hearing more. Citylight 7, this is like a movie. Not everyone has the courage to react so calmly like you did. Were you really not scared? How did you keep it together? You know what the worst part of life is? It's when it doesn't break you all at once, but piece by piece. Every day, a small blow, and you don't even notice how your former self disappears. And then, when you're already standing on the edge, something completely unexpected happens. And you start to think, maybe this is the moment when I'll finally feel something different. After our brief conversation, I realized that Jake, as he later introduced himself, didn't seem to know what to do next. He wasn't the classic image of a robber you might picture. Instead of aggression, there was something human in him, but at the same time, he looked just as lost in the situation as I was. We were sitting in my living room on the old leather couch I had bought 3 years ago during a sale at a local furniture store. I remember every detail of that moment, the sound of rain tapping against the windows, the clock on the wall showing 10:15 p.m. I hadn't been able to sleep properly for weeks. Insomnia had become my normal state ever since the accident. Jake was holding my old family photo, my parents, my brother, and me. My brother had passed away when I was 15. That picture must have caught his attention because he asked, "Is this your family?" There was no indifference in his voice, the kind you'd expect from a burglar. He was genuinely interested. I started talking. hesitantly at first, but then the words just flowed. I told him about my parents, about the accident on January 12th this year, when they died in a head-on collision. How I lost myself afterward. How my boyfriend of 4 years left a month later because he couldn't handle my emotional breakdowns. And how I've been living here, in this small apartment that feels more like a cage than a home. He listened silently, never interrupting. And the more I talked, the less I felt like he was a burglar. I started seeing him as someone broken, just like me, both of us stuck in this cycle where life only tears us down, giving nothing back. Then he began telling his story. He grew up in a poor neighborhood in South Newark, New Jersey. His father was an alcoholic, and his mother left when he was 12. Since then, he had lived in a world where survival depended on how quickly you could learn to be tough. He worked in construction, but lost his job 2 months ago when the company downsized. The money ran out, the debts piled up, and, as he said, one day you just break, and you start doing stupid things, and tonight was one of those stupid things. I listened to him, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. There was an unexpected connection between us, something more than just a conversation. It felt like we were both standing on the edge, but at the same time, holding each other from falling. Reddit comments, empath_queen23, Sarah, this is so deep. It seems like you found a kindred spirit in the most unexpected person. I can totally understand why you kept talking. Sometimes, being heard means more than anything. Break the cycle 34. Wow, I would have never imagined someone could feel a connection with a burglar. But this shows how we can all be broken and find comfort in the strangest situations. Lost Tonight 77. This sounds almost like therapy, but in a situation where you'd never expect it. It's crazy how shared wounds can bring two strangers closer. Heart and Crime 01. Sarah, your words stir up so many emotions. They remind me of my own experience when I found someone I could talk to more easily than anyone else. Looking forward to more of your story. It's strange how we can find common ground with someone we're supposed to fear or even hate. I would never have thought that this night in April would change my perspective on life. At the very moment when everything around you feels shattered, you find someone who's just as broken, and unexpectedly, they become your only anchor. It was already 11:30 p.m. We were still sitting on my couch in the living room, and it felt like time had stopped. I glanced at the clock, the one I had bought with my ex-boyfriend at a Target sale 3 years ago, and thought about how much had changed since then. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of a yellow lamp, and the rain was still tapping against the window in the background. It created an almost unreal atmosphere, like something out of a movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was my real life. Jake had already shared more about his life than I ever expected to hear from a burglar. He didn't seem like a monster to me. Quite the opposite, he was just a person, broken, like me. His words cut deep because they reflected my own pain. He talked about how 2019 was the year everything fell apart for him. His father died of a drug overdose, and his mother never returned. That was his breaking point, after which everything started spiraling downward. It felt like our lives had crossed paths at the worst possible moment for both of us. I was also in despair. It had been months since I lost my parents, but I still couldn't find my footing. I started working more, taking extra shifts at the office just to avoid being home alone. But that didn't help. The emptiness inside me only grew. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Leaning my elbows on my knees, I put my hands over my head and said, "Jake, I don't know why you're here, but I feel like this is more than just a robbery." His gaze stayed on me. He didn't rush to respond, as if he was processing my words. Then, quietly, he said, "I'm just trying to survive." I didn't have a plan for tonight. We were both cornered by our own lives. It felt like the world outside this room was falling apart, and only here, together, we could find some small sense of stability. I don't know what triggered what happened next, but I felt a strong pull toward Jake. It wasn't something I had expected, and it didn't make sense logically. But in that moment, it was the only thing that mattered. We sat there, side by side on the couch, and suddenly I stood up, walking a few steps toward the window. The rain slid down the glass as I stared out at the empty street. Don't you feel like we're both just running away from reality? I asked, not turning back to him. I heard him come closer. Maybe it's the only escape we have, he said softly. That night, we both found comfort in something we couldn't find in the world outside this room. It was more than just a physical connection, it was two broken people finding solace in each other's arms. I knew this moment wouldn't solve my problems. It wouldn't fix the past or change the losses I'd endured. But it was the first time in months that I felt alive. Reddit comments, MidnightDreamer_88, this part really struck me. It feels like you both found shelter in each other, while the world outside the living room just disappeared, WoundedHealer_45. Honestly, I believe that in moments of deepest despair, we can find comfort where we least expect it. That's exactly what I felt reading your story, Sarah, hearts_and_pieces. This resonates with me so much. I've been through something similar when my life fell apart. You found something more in Jake than just a person. It's like your shared pain brought you together. Escape and love 9. The way you described that moment, I could literally feel every heartbeat. The rain, the silence, it all creates such a deep atmosphere. I can't imagine what happens next. It happened on the night of April 10th, in that very moment when my life seemed completely shattered. Have you ever felt like every part of your existence is slowly breaking, and there's nowhere to run? My battle with myself had been going on for months, but that night, when Jake showed up in my home, everything changed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't alone. It was 11:45 p.m. We stood by the window, looking out at the dark street below. The rain continued to tap against the glass, a backdrop to our conversation. The unexpected warmth of his presence next to me gave me a sense of safety that I hadn't felt in a long time. Despite the absurdity of the situation, having a burglar in my home, it all felt unreal, almost absurd. Jake was just as broken as I was. We had both lost our sense of direction in life, but his gaze told me that he felt the same loneliness that had consumed me. His eyes looked exhausted, like those of someone who had been battling their own demons for far too long. Sarah, I can't tell you why I'm here. But I don't think this is a coincidence, he said quietly, his voice carrying an emotional depth that drew me closer to him. We stood in silence for a few moments, as if the world around us had paused. I felt like everything happening between us was beyond ordinary. This wasn't just two people meeting. It was an escape from the reality where everything had fallen apart. The tension between us grew with each passing second. Slowly, we moved closer to each other. Jake lightly touched my shoulder. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it wasn't just any touch. I suddenly realized that this was more than just a search for physical connection. It was the desire to find peace in a world that only seemed to bring pain. Do you think this is right? I asked, still not believing that all of this was happening to me. His gaze answered without words. We both knew that logically, this wasn't right, but maybe it was the only escape for both of us. In those moments, I felt emotional closeness intertwined with physical intimacy. The moment was filled not just with passion, but with pain. We were both trying to find something more than just comfort. We were searching for salvation in each other, fleeing from the internal emptiness that felt endless. In his embrace, I felt, if only for a moment, that the emptiness was fading away. Reddit comments, SoulSearcher84, this is so emotional. You know, sometimes a moment of closeness isn't just physical, it's a deep desire to find an emotional connection when everything around you is falling apart. You're not alone in those feelings, Sarah, Broken and Brave 77. Jake isn't just a burglar. Like you, he's trying to find meaning in life. Sometimes we meet such people at the most unexpected moments, heart_n_mind. The way you describe your emotions is truly deep. I've been in a similar situation, where emotions are so intertwined with pain that you just want to feel something that can save you, even if only for a moment. Lost in Time 23. Sarah, the way you described this moment made me reflect. Maybe we're all looking for refuge in someone else's arms when our own lives are falling apart.